Hi. We're about to listen to an audio, and I just want to give a little bit of an update about what this audio is pointing to. In A Course in Miracles, in the Manual for Teachers, under the first question in the Manual for Teachers, which is called, Who are God's Teachers? And this is the answer, at least the first part of the answer to that question. A teacher of God is anyone who chooses to be one. His qualifications consist solely in this: somehow, somewhere, he has made a deliberate choice in which he did not see his interests as apart from someone else's. Once he has done that, his road is established and his direction is sure. A light has entered the darkness. It may be a single light, but that is enough. What we're about to listen to is when this shift occurred for me. It's funny because the way this is written, that the teacher of God has made a deliberate choice. It sounds like this is an intellectual choice, but that's not how I experienced it. This choice happened to me. And what you'll hear me describing in this audio is that the way I described it then was I had achieved some higher level of love. But that love was this seeing everyone's interests as the same as mine. When I first made this shift, it was dramatically different from the self-centered way that I saw before. And so it was like a high. It did eventually settle down so that it wasn't a high, but it never went away. It became the new baseline, the new foundation. Let me play the audio, and then I'll come back and just share a little bit more.
Hello, everyone. I just want to start by saying I love you. I am not the same person that I was last week. I think I should just say that right up front. I was literally changed over the weekend. Camp for Miracles was an extremely appropriate name, at least in my case. And I'm just going to go ahead and try and describe what happened to me right off the bat, because some of you may have already noticed a change. If you've been watching my postings on the Peace of God, you may have already noticed. So I'm just going to start right off by explaining as best I can. But I would say that what has happened to me is I have become aware of a higher level of love. I don't know how else to describe it. It is a higher level of love. And it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. It actually takes a bit of getting used to. There's a part of me, which of course would be the ego, a part of the mind that actually does not like it. It doesn't. And so in order to maintain it, there is, there has to be a willingness, more than a willingness. It's a decision. It's a decision. It's more than a willingness. It's a decision. Because there is another part of the mind that really wants to throw this away. There's another part of the mind that does not like this at all. And so what I'm describing is not the state of what we would call egoless. It's not that. But it is very, very definitely a higher level of love than I have ever been aware of before, and it is amazing. I'm finding that I am truly in love with everyone and everything in a way that I never have been before. And probably a number of things at the camp led to me having this experience. One of those things, however, was a person that I met. There was a person that came to the Camp for Miracles, interestingly enough, to see me. He thought he was coming to see me. But I feel very clearly that he was sent to help me. But he came, when I first saw him, my eyes first saw him, all I saw was light. And to be actually, as honest as I can, I was struck with fear. And I very quickly looked away. I didn't even want to look at him. And then as I was not looking at him, I thought about what I saw, and I thought about my reaction, and I realized that I could choose again. I realized I did not have to listen to that fear that did not want to look at the light. And so I looked back at him and in spite of the fear, smiled. That was all that was required. He was like across the room from me. But I smiled, and that was my way of saying to the fear, I was not going to fear this light. And as he came closer, I said hello to him, and we were able to hug. But what happened over the weekend, I was with a lot of people over the weekend, but I had a number of opportunities to be with this man. And what was really amazing is that I continued to see the light in him whenever I talked to him. It was very, very, very clear. And what was really funny about it was, of course, he does not see the same light. And so sometimes when he talked, it was undoubtedly the Holy Spirit. But there were other times when he spoke, and he spoke like a man. And I remember even thinking it was funny. It was difficult for me to even take him seriously because I barely saw, I could see the thin veil over him that looked like a man, but for the most part, all I saw was the light. And it was funny to me that this light should be talking as if it was a man. It was just funny to me. And as I got to spend more time with him, what actually started to happen was I began to see that light in others. So it spread. It started with him, but it spread. And I began to really see it in everyone in a way that I never have before. And it was that as it spread from him to everyone, that I began to be lifted up into this love and this gratitude that was so overwhelming that on Sunday morning, I was just crying. Even when it was time for me to get up and speak, I was crying, and they had to stop and, let me, wipe my face with tissues and begin again. And in fact, I think I actually affected several people because I saw others burst out in tears as well. And the love was just incredible, but it has not left me. And one thing I'm very aware of is why it has not left me. Because another thing that I learned as I talked to this man and several others, there were people there who had had experiences of joy, experiences of peace, experiences of happiness. You might even call them real world experiences. People there who had approached what we call the eye of the needle. And I had conversations with a lot of these people, and I heard these stories over and over and over again. And one thing that I noticed that was consistent in all the stories, each of these people had come back from that experience. Their experience of joy, or pure peace, or real world, or eye of the needle, all of these experiences had ended, and they had, we could say, come back into the world as it was before. But as I listened to each and every one of them tell their story, I heard why. Even though they weren't even aware of it. It was kind of funny. They weren't aware. They would say to me, I don't know why it ended. But then as they told their story, each one of them told me literally the point where they decided that it would end. Each one of them told me that point where they made the decision. And in fact, on the final day, I happened to have breakfast, and some of them were all at the same table with me. And I was able to say, and you told me that, you made this decision, and that's when it ended. And you told me that you made this decision, and that's when it ended. And I was able to show each of them and me that what ended the experience was literally a decision. And so the reverse of that is that if we want the experience to continue, that is also a decision. It's a decision not to listen to the ego. It's a decision not to entertain the ego. It's a decision not to believe the ego. And as I mentioned, what I'm experiencing now is incredible, but it is not egoless. It is not egoless.
I'll go ahead and stop it right there. What happened in my story is that this shift occurred that I'm describing in this audio. This would have been May 2007. And this shift became a new baseline. At first, there was this mystical high. And in fact, there were a lot of mystical experiences that happened over the next few weeks that you may have heard about. the experience of being the apple, the experience of knowing the towel rack and the floor in Shanghai, China as love, as God, lots of mystical experiences. But after a few weeks, I felt this inner calling to pray and ask that I see everything in me. I don't remember the exact wording, that still needed to be healed or that was a block to love's presence. I don't remember. And that's when I entered my most intense purification period, the next year and a half. The man that I talked about that I saw at the Camp for Miracles. And when I first looked towards where this man was, I literally saw a pillar of light. I didn't even see a man that first time. But this man, I ended up joining into relationship with. His name is Laurent. And he ended up coming and staying with me for a year and a half. And Laurent and I were very, very different in every way, which enabled every button in me that could be pushed, everything that could be upsetting, everything that I could, as a person, try and hold on to because this was important to me. All of that stuff came up. It was just enormous. And I went through a lot of purification, a lot of removing the blocks to love's presence. What enabled this to happen for me was, one, that new baseline, because even though, in the story, even though Laurent seemed to be the problem, that's the way the story would go, he seemed to be the problem, my mind never went back to seeing a person that way. I saw his interests as the same as mine. And even in the most difficult times in that relationship, I loved him. Sometimes romantic love, sometimes not. That came and went, but always love. So this new foundation of seeing everyone's interests as the same as mine, seeing us all as awakening together, which of course now is the name of the organization that I founded. That was an important shift for me. That allowed me to move through purification without blaming someone else for my upsets, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also going to advance to the end of this audio where there's going to be a message. And then I'm going to explain a process of letting go of the ego. You heard me just say that I talked to all of these people who appeared to make similar shifts, but then those shifts fell away and they fell back into their previous way of being. And what happened is I talked to those people that weekend is they could tell me the thought that entered their mind that they grabbed onto and believed. It was like an ego thought that would pop in and they grabbed onto it and believed it. And when they believed that thought, they went kind of back to where they were, so that the shift ended up being a temporary experience. What I learned to do, and I practiced over and over and over again throughout the next year and a half, was the ego thoughts still came, of course. In fact, they came as rapid fire, but I learned not to grab onto them. And so the portion of the audio that we're about to hear now is where I'm sharing the learning, the practice that I used in order to purify, rather than falling back into believing the ego, back into seeing my interests as different from others, back into self-centeredness, right? So let me find that portion of the audio and we'll listen to that next.
Not hurt myself again today is reminding me of that, except my whole screen just went somewhere else. And that is very, very important, because we will never change the way we see if we are not willing to change the way we see. Yeah, well, see, we all knew. We could have, we probably could have bet on this if we'd wanted to. Wait, we're starting with it's just a decision. Who wants to bet on how it's going to end? Because I think we're getting to know the Holy Spirit pretty well, right? All right, here we go. It is just a decision. What I fear the most is loss of self. When a brother seems to attack me and I jump to my defense with a grievance, I am defending my limited self, for I have seen my brother and I as separate and our salvation as being in conflict. Is it this self I would defend? Is this the state I would have saved in my mind? There is another self, which is still me. It is the self which includes my brother and knows no conflict. It is the self that requires no defense because it simply is. It is the self that embraces all in peace and joy. This self is also in my mind, and this self needs no defense. This self will arise to take its place in my mind as I let it, by letting the limited, separate self go. It is as easy as letting a balloon go. I simply need to decide that I want to let it go, and then open my hand. To open my hand is to be set free. To release is to realize. It is just a decision. So, that really, again, that brings us right back to how we started. That, if we are really focusing on the ego, however that ego happens to look, if we are focusing on the ego, we are believing the ego, we are experiencing the ego. And we just need to decide not to do that. We literally need to make the decision not to entertain the ego. And then again, what we want to watch is the difference between denying through fear and recognizing the opportunity to listen to the ego but letting it go. I mean, that's the thin line we want to stay in, because we all want to be happy. We all want to experience this higher level of love, but we don't want to do it falsely. We want it to be a true and a real experience. So if the thought comes into my mind, that so-and-so is a jerk, that's the example I always seem to use. If the thought comes into my mind that so-and-so is a jerk, what I want to realize is I don't have to believe that thought, regardless of what so-and-so seems to be doing. I don't have to believe that thought. It is a thought I can let go of. I can say, I see that thought, but that is not how I choose to see this person. And that's like opening my hand and letting the balloon go, right there. And then I have the experience that is love, or is being called realize here. To release is to realize. But I have to make that decision. The mistake I don't want to make is see the thought, so-and-so is a jerk, and say, oh God, I'm not supposed to think that. Do you see the difference in that? The fear, oh no, I'm not supposed to think that. That's fear, that's denial, and then any seeming peace I have, is false, because it's like David Hoffmeister calls icing on a mud pie. I don't want icing on a mud pie. I want icing on my angel food cake, maybe. So I want to make sure that I'm not denying those fears. And the way that I don't deny those fears is by realizing they're literally meaningless. We think that because I think so-and-so is a jerk, I'm a bad person, or I would never have had the thought, and that's why I get afraid and why I deny it. But if I realize it is literally just a thought, the Holy Spirit's interpretation of the New Testament in the book of Ephesians teaches us to think of the mind, I'll call it the individual mind, or the thinking mind. Think of it as like a radio receiver. And what it does is it picks up thoughts that are within our mind. And right now our mind is still split. So there are still both ego and Holy Spirit thoughts in our mind. So my little receiver is going to pick up an attack thought or pick up a guilt thought, because that's what receivers do. They pick them up. But just because it picks it up does not mean that I have to accept it. So when, the thought comes into my mind, so-and-so is a jerk, all I have to do is say, yeah, I see that, but that's not what I want. Just like we talked another time, just like shopping. When you're shopping and you're looking at, blouses or shirts on a rack, you just go right past the ones you don't want and you only take the ones you do. Same thing with thoughts. You just go right past the ones you don't want. There's no reason to fear them. They don't say anything about you, your reality. Just because a thought came into the mind means nothing. So all you have to do, no matter what it is let it go. The thought could be saying, I do not like that person. And you can say, that's not true. That's just a thought, and let it go. And when you do, you will find love flowing out of you for that same one. So it's just a decision. And deciding to release the ego is as easy as opening our hand and releasing a balloon. We just have to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Dove is saying, can we hear I love you again? Absolutely. I love you. I not only love you, but I feel grateful for you. Another thing that happened to me this weekend is that I realized that I would not experience anything if it wasn't for you. I really realized that I am so connected to you. It's hard to describe with words, but I am so connected to you that if it wasn't for you, I would have no experience. I would be nothing, literally nothing. What we do for each other is we create experience together, and experience is what we wanted. So I am so grateful to you, and I love you. 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 And my purpose now is to love everything and to love every moment, and to realize no matter what seeming thing I'm loving now, that thing is only representative of the whole. So in every moment, I'm loving everyone. Y'all.
So one thing that's interesting was this message. Let me just pop back to that real quick. This message that I read came on April 23rd, 2005. The shift that this message pointed to came in May 2007. So by receiving messages like this, by giving my willingness to messages like this, by practicing to the best of my ability the messages that I received earlier, shifts, magnificent shifts, seem to come miraculously later. It amazes me now how much this message pointed to the relationship that was going to happen with Laurent, and how much purification I would go through. Again, looking at this message, what I fear the most is loss of self. When a brother seems to attack me and I jump to my defense with a grievance, I am defending my limited self, for I have seen my brother and I as separate, and our salvation as being in conflict. You see, that's the shift I just described, is that way of seeing changed. Instead of seeing my brother and I as separate, I saw us as the same, and I saw our interests as the same. I saw our salvation as the same. And that was the new foundation that allowed me to go through this relationship that was to come, and the purification that was to happen. What I fear the most is loss of self. When a brother seems to attack me and I jump to my defense with a grievance, I am defending my limited self, for I have seen my brother and I as separate, and our salvation as being in conflict. Is this the self I would defend? Is this the state I would have saved in my mind? And by practicing that process that you just heard me describe in the audio, where I see that thought, but I am not going to accept that thought, or I am not going to believe that thought, or I'm not going to give my attention to that thought. By practicing that process very consistently in the year and a half that I was with Laurent, I was not defending the little self, right? I was not defending the little self. So that's what I have to share for now. Bye.